Hello, my name is Patrick Usher. I am an ME-CFS patient, and in this video I'm going to be talking about my trip to Germany last year in order to have 7 HELP apheresis treatments for my condition. Now, HELP apheresis is a blood filtering procedure that is capable of removing microclots, microscopic clots that are in the blood, condensing it, making it thick, interfering with oxygen transfer. And these microclots, as you probably know, have been found as a key component of illnesses like ME-CFS and long COVID. However, if you're not familiar with that idea, I recommend that you watch my previous video in which I go into the research and the basic ideas about microclots, the kind of symptoms they create, how they're formed, and so on. So I've been aware of the possibility that I might have microclotting ever since I watched a BBC interview with Dr. Asad Khan and Dr. Beate Jäger. Now, Asad Khan is himself a long COVID ME-CFS patient who has undertaken HELP apheresis procedures, and these really helped him. And Dr. Jäger is a doctor in Germany who has pioneered this treatment specifically for long COVID and ME-CFS. Although as a treatment it has a long history for other conditions, mainly to do with serious heart issues and cardiovascular problems of various kinds. And since that point, I wondered, did this apply to me? And there were certain sort of telltale signs. For example, the fact that I had rather dark fingernails, as you can see in this picture. Because when you have microclots, particularly at a more extensive level, your blood actually darkens because it's condensed by the existence of the microclots, and therefore it becomes darker in colour. And so in the end of the day, in early spring of 2023, I had been doing relatively well for a few months. I've been pacing carefully, building up much more patiently than I might otherwise. And then I crashed, and I crashed terribly. And I was in this situation where, can I lift my head? Can I turn over, etc., etc. And at that point I said to myself, I can't bear this much longer, so I'm going to take a risk. I've always been someone who believes to try and help the body to do it itself. But especially because I'd had this long period where I'd kind of followed all the rules pretty well, and yet here I still was having periods unable to move, I said, it's time for something different. And so I wrote to many of the HELP apheresis clinics in Germany saying, what's your availability? And only a couple wrote back, actually. But one of them wrote back, the clinic in Bayreuth. That's, if you're not German, you would probably say Bayreuth, but there we go. Anyway, in Bayreuth, wrote back to me saying, we have availability in 3 weeks. Without kind of overthinking it, I wrote back immediately and just said yes. And then I realized the enormity of what I'd done. And so I then had this period of 3 weeks of actual quite intense anxiety in preparing for the trip, because I had, for the most part, had to live with my dad because I wasn't well enough to be independent. I had experiments at independent living, and let's just say that the results were varied. And so the idea of actually going on my own to Germany in order to have a treatment in which all of my blood would be put through a filter filled me with dread. I was terrified. What if something goes wrong from one of the treatments? What if I have a terrible crash and I can't manage, etc., etc. And I actually managed to convince myself the day before leaving that I wasn't going to go. And in the morning I woke up the next day, I said, right, that's it, I'm going. So, there was intense anxiety around it. And it was a 2-day trip to Germany. But I have to say that once I got there, having been living in a very rural situation, or when I was independent, only living in small villages, to suddenly be in a medium-sized city with all the lovely German architecture and everything, I actually lost a lot of that fear very quickly, and I was glad to be there. It was nice to have a change, even though, of course, I was worried, what if things go wrong, etc. And there were times, I was there altogether for 3.5 months, there were times that I had awful experiences health-wise. I had about 3 really horrendous episodes, and I wished to God that I wasn't there. But ultimately, I did it. I went and I got the treatments done. All right, so before we get to my experience of the treatments and the changes that these made for me, I want to tell you a little bit about what HELP apheresis actually is. So HELP does not stand for, like, help me please. It's not, as a patient, you might assume that. But actually it stands for heparin, extracorporeal lipoprotein / fibrinogen precipitation. Now, what does all that mean? So heparin, as you may already know, is a blood thinning medication. There are many people who have problems with blood thickness who are put on heparin. So the procedure uses heparin. It's extracorporeal. That means it's outside of the body, right? So the blood is being taken out through a venous into a filter, and it's in the filter that the magic is happening. So it's extracorporeal. Fibrinogen / lipoprotein precipitation. Precipitation means taking out, and lipoprotein refers to cholesterol, and fibrinogen refers to a clotting factor in the blood. So the procedure is one in which your blood is taken, there's a line out from one arm going into the filter, the blood is filtered, and it is then returned into the other arm. And so the condition works, very well for this problem of microclotting, because not only does it take out fibrinogen, which is a clotting factor, but because heparin is a declotting agent, it actually removes the microclots as well. Now, you might ask how much heparin is being used in this procedure. And the truth is, it's an awful lot of heparin. In fact, each procedure uses 400,000 IU of heparin. Now, to put that into context, someone is simply taking heparin on a daily basis as a medication. The typical dose is about 20,000. So this is actually 20 times more than that. And so you might say, well, look, how will that not kill me? I mean, 400,000 units of heparin, surely I'm just going to bleed internally and I'm going to die. And the reason that this does not happen is because all of the heparin, basically, apart from a slight dose at the beginning, all of the heparin remains in the filter. It is reabsorbed into the filter. And this is why HELP apheresis is considered a very safe procedure. It indeed has a long track record of safety in relation to other conditions. And I will link down below a paper about that. So all of the heparin stays in the filter. How much blood is being filtered in a given treatment? Well, this largely depends on the decision of the doctor and the patient. It could be as little as 2 litres of plasma, or it could be as much as 4 litres of plasma. Only the plasma is being affected by this procedure, not the red blood cells. And I myself, for the 7 treatments, stuck at 3 litres of plasma filtration. I made that decision because in ME-CFS there is often a reduction of blood volume. While a healthy person has about 2.8 litres of plasma, this is usually reduced in ME-CFS, maybe down to 2.5, 2.4, 2.3 litres of plasma. You can watch my other videos on this channel about blood volume if you are interested in learning more about that. And for that reason, I didn't want to overtax my system. And so I found 3 litres to work quite well. Each treatment took around 3 hours. And at the end of the treatment, you can actually look over at the filter and see the residue that's been taken out of your body. Now, what you're looking at now in this picture is an example of the residue. So it's made up of the microclots, the cholesterol, and various toxins that have been taken out of the blood. And so the actual residue part is the kind of white, sludgy, slightly dark matter that's at the bottom of the filter. Right, so that's how the treatment actually works. Now I just want to talk a little bit about the human element. So I was enormously anxious about these treatments. As any ME-CFS patient well knows, our bodies are very sensitive. Even a supplement could set you back. And so the idea of having all of my blood going outside of my body, being filtered by an enormous amount of heparin, filled me with a huge amount of nervousness and anxiety. And I have never been more anxious in my life than when the first treatment was starting. I went into an enormous freeze response. My muscles tensed up in a profound way. I've never experienced anything like it. My hands felt like they're going into a claw, and I actually thought I was going to pass out. That's how nervous I was, and I was begging the nurse to stop. I mean, this happened as soon as I saw the blood coming out of me. I couldn't take it. But the doctor came in and he reassured me, and he said, "This is our safest treatment." And he had a very calm manner. And the more he talked, even though I wasn't exactly understanding him because I was certain these were my last moments on earth, his calm tone eventually started to calm me down enough to be able to continue. He even said to me, that there are sheikhs, very rich sheikhs in the Middle East, who have their own private HELP Apheresis machines, and they have a treatment once a week just for fun, And while he was saying this, I was sort of thinking that maybe they need to have a new hobby. But ultimately he calmed me down enough to continue. And what I would say is that over the course of the 7 treatments, I became less and less anxious about them. Of course, you never look forward to a procedure like this. But by the end, I was very relaxed about it and wondered what I'd ever been scared of. So now I want to talk about what effect the treatment actually had on me. And in this case, we can talk about what you actually feel even during the treatment and what I felt after the treatments. So first of all, even during the very first treatment, after about 45 minutes, I started to notice changes in my body. And those changes were, I had these waves of warmth going through my body, particularly in my face, but really in my arms and legs. There were these waves of warmth. And what that actually was improvements in my circulation. Because when you have very microclotted blood, and if you haven't seen my last video where I talk about microclotting, just to reiterate, my blood was probably among the worst in these cases. I'll show you another picture. I'll re-show you a picture of my microclotted blood a bit later in the video. It was very bad. And when you're starting to actually remove the clots, the blood is becoming thinner, more normal in its consistency. And so it actually starts to get into parts of the body known as the microcirculation. So these are areas of the body that, the blood vessels are so tiny that the blood actually needs to be of a normal consistency, not thick, in order to actually pass into those areas. And so because my blood was becoming a bit thinner, I was starting to feel it getting into parts of my body where it had not been circulating for a very long time. So particularly in my face, I was getting these, warmth and throughout my body, really. And it was a lovely feeling. It really relaxed me. It was just like waves and waves of warmth. And really, I would say in every single treatment, I experienced this phenomenon. Now, after the first treatment, I was pretty woozy, but I was otherwise all right. I did go into a minor crash, and I would actually say that that's fairly common, that people will have a crash response to some degree after a treatment. I did after the first 3, but they were manageable. So after that first treatment, I actually just felt like I'd always had this pressure in my chest quite centrally, and it let go. It was unburdened. So that was very pleasant. I remember my body just felt just that bit more alive. When I went out to a shop to open the door of the shop, normally my muscles in my arm would burn immediately when trying to open a door. That's quite heavy. And that didn't happen. So I was really encouraged about these kinds of things. After my second treatment, my body felt much sunnier. I remember walking around the centre of Bayreuth and just noticing that my body felt lighter, that it was easier to walk around. So these kinds of things were very encouraging. Now, after the third treatment, I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to rest after these treatments. Budget on at least 2 days of mainly resting. You must respect these treatments because the effect of the third treatment was profound. And this makes sense because if your blood is very heavily microclotted, you have the first treatment and it's not, the filter isn't able to be as effective yet because it's coming up against this sludge-like blood. And it's only able to make a certain dent into that because the blood is so thick. And then the second treatment, it makes another dent. And all of a sudden, the situation is the blood is more kind of amenable to being treated because the balance is starting to shift. Less microclots in the blood. It's flowing more easily on its own. And suddenly you do the treatment and it's going to be way more powerful. And that's what happened after treatment 3. I will never forget the 2 or 3 days after treatment 3. All I could do was lie down. And all throughout my body, I was having this effect. The feeling of blood getting in everywhere, oxygenation improving everywhere. It was intense. It's a very warm, gungy sort of feeling. I felt the blood pumping up into my brain, like I could really feel it into my legs, arms, everywhere. And I could do nothing in that period of time. And so that was really amazing. I mean, it was a little scary at the time, I have to say, because I was so unable to do anything, but I knew that this was just going to lead to a much greater improvement once it had passed. And pass it did. So then I had treatments 4, 5, 6, and 7, and they all passed in a much more straightforward way, all had their levels of improvement that were encouraging. And so what I would say is that after the 7 treatments, which I did over 3 months, some people are more intense with their treatment schedule. I didn't really want to do that, even though, I'm hanging around in Germany or whatever, but I just wanted to allow my body to adapt to the effects of each treatment. I didn't want to overwhelm it. So what I would say is after the 7 treatments, I improved around a full 20%. And maybe that doesn't sound like a lot. I think one of the things we forget as ME-CFS or long COVID patients is when, a full 20% is actually quite significant. Sometimes we think we take a supplement and it helps us a lot and we're like, oh, that's helped me 15%, but actually it's not really. It might only be 4% that it's helped you. Like, I'm talking about a full 20% improvement in my body's functioning. And for me, that was worth the whole experience. And I think it was actually medically very necessary for me to have this treatment. I'll talk more about why a bit later. And so even though at the end of all of it, I still had and still have ME-CFS, my functioning improved, my exercise intolerance improved, my circulation improved, my cognitive capacities improved, the pressure in my chest is gone, air hunger has reduced, my body is lighter. And I am very grateful for all of these changes. There is no doubt, even though my life can still be very difficult, a crash is still a crash, that my life is also different. There is a clear before HELP Apheresis and a clear after. And I'm now recording this video 9 months since my last treatment, and I am confident to say that in essence, I have maintained those improvements. I do not believe, even if maybe the microclots have come back a little bit, I don't know, but in essence, I believe that I have maintained that improvement. Now, subjective feelings of improvement are one thing, but objective measures of improvement are another. And there are 3 objective measures of improvement that I want to show you. The first relates to the color of my blood. Now, as you know from my previous video, my blood was black, and it was black because it was so heavily microclotted that it had condensed and become darker in color. So it was black, it was very thick, it was slow moving. What happened was the color of my blood changed in front of my eyes over the course of the treatments. So you've seen here now the color that it was, and I'm going to show you now the color that it became. So this is my blood in the very last moments of my final treatment. As you can see, it has now become a normal maroon burgundy red. And how wonderful it is as a patient to see something that was so horrendous change back to normal. That can only help you. The second change, then obviously related, is the color of my fingernails. So here again I am showing you the color of my fingernails before treatment, which is again reflective of the darker color of my blood. And now I am showing you my fingernails at the end when they have resumed a rosier. The final objective measure of improvement related to something that the nurse had to do during the procedure. A lot of the long COVID ME-CFS patients who are in this clinic, their blood is so thick that it needs to actually be thinned during the treatment in order to get it flowing through the filter. And this is achieved by adding isotonic saline to the blood. Now, initially, the nurse told me that in my first few treatments, she had to add 1.5 litres of isotonic saline to my blood over the course of the treatment. By the end of my treatments, this was no longer necessary. She did not have to add any isotonic saline to my blood. I think only a tiny little bit, like a few 300 millilitres or something, which is a standard in the treatment anyway. So this was another aspect of direct evidence that my blood was flowing freely and was totally different to the start of the procedures. Now, one piece of advice I would have for people interested in taking this treatment is to drink, and it's not medical advice, this is just what worked for me, but to drink maybe a litre of oral rehydration solution prior to the treatment, because this will boost your blood volume, boost your blood pressure, so that when you're having the blood that's going out of you into the filter, you will maintain your blood pressure during the treatment. Because sometimes, rather rarely, but sometimes people can faint because their blood pressure drops too low. I also found drinking oral rehydration solution was helpful after the treatment as well. And this maybe makes sense because you have all these areas of the microcirculation that have been cut off. Suddenly the blood is getting in again, which means that and this is just my theory, okay, so I'm not saying this is proven, but this means that you have an an increase in the overall vascular space that's available for the circulation, but your body hasn't actually caught up yet in creating the additional blood that you would need for those the parts that you're now getting circulation back into. So drinking oral rehydration solution, I think, can be very helpful after the treatment as well. Okay, the cost of the treatment, of course, is very expensive. This is not a money-making exercise for the clinics. The nature of the filter is, in fact, very expensive. And then you have nursing costs, doctor costs, overheads. So really the clinic isn't actually making any real profit on this, but it's €1,400 per treatment. Most people need 5 treatments. Obviously I needed 7. My situation was, I think, a bit more extreme than it would be for other people. My experience in the dialysis center, the Dialysezentrum in Bayreuth, was very positive. The main nurse there looking after HELP Apheresis, Lisa, I really loved her. She was very skilled with the needles. I never had any problem with them. She has a great manner. She was very reassuring. I enjoyed talking to her, and she oversaw my treatments very well. The main doctor that I had contact with, Dr. Satanovsky, also had a great manner and was very reassuring and always happy to answer questions. So for me, that side of things was also very positive. And I also just want to say about that this was, I do have a very good ME-CFS consultant in Ireland. He's one of about 3 ME-CFS consultants in the country. I don't know if that's true, but you know what I mean. But this was essentially the first time that I have gone to medical professionals and not been treated like I was crazy. This is the first time I have been given respect. This is the first time that I have been held in a conventional medical professional structure that was validating, that had absolutely no other assumption other than that I was sick and that I needed help, that they were actually there for you. It was the first time I've experienced that. And this is how it should be. These illnesses are extremely serious and they're no joke, and the people are really suffering. And the mainstream medical profession, although it is changing slowly, its record is dire in relation to people with these conditions. And although the ship is also turning slowly in Germany, it's moving more quickly than in other places. This is how it should be. People should be treated with respect and an understanding that they are sick, and of course an understanding of what they are going through. And I'm not saying that the people in this dialysis centre were, up to date with all the aspects of ME-CFS research, but they knew about the microclotting, they knew how to do the treatment, and they cared, and that's how it should be. So as I had that little emotional moment there, I'm sure many of you can actually relate to that, as you have gone to doctors and you've been very ill, and because they don't actually know anything about the research, the system doesn't teach them anything about the research, even though it's there. ME-CFS and long COVID, they're not actually that mysterious. If you lay out all the research, it's not a mystery. But they're not taught it, and then many of them, not all of course, but many of them will jump from that to you're just crazy. And this is obviously highly unscientific, but it's what people do. And unfortunately, this is what people have to face. So I think that this treatment, even though it didn't cure me, I believe it was medically essential, given how thick my blood was. I used to have awful symptoms where I actually thought I was going to get a stroke or something because the blood flow to my brain was so poor. And these were terrifying. I have not had that since my treatments, and I would go and do them again. I know that this is not like a well-validated treatment yet for these issues, but the rationale is there. I also have a paper by Dr. Beate Jäger down below about the rationale. There is one study that I'm aware of by Dr. Bucher in Germany, who that was in I just read a summary of it in a study for an apheresis conference, which I will link down below along with the page number. But basically, he found that people generally really appreciated the treatment and that they did improve in a noticeable way. And it needs more research. It needs more thought about modifications for people with these illnesses, perhaps, or whatever. But in essence, my experience was very good. And I also leave down below a link to the Long COVID Apheresis Facebook group where people share a lot of their experiences around this treatment. Again, some positive. Some people, of course, unfortunately get worse from the treatment because it's too taxing or for whatever reason. In general, however, just I would say from reading anecdotal reports of people's experiences, I would say that around 80% of people improve somewhere between 20 to 30%. That is purely anecdotal. And then a small percentage of people may improve rather a lot more than that. And then an even smaller percentage of people, unfortunately, may get worse. So that's everything I have to say in this video. I hope it was of help to you, of interest if you're new to trying to understand microclotting and treatments for it, or maybe you're thinking of doing this procedure yourself. I hope it was a helpful overview. Various links down below. I have a free download of a book, A Medical Hypothesis, all about the problem of excessive thirst in ME-CFS, long COVID and POTS. I also offer consultations if you're interested in discussing these ideas more, like you want to know more about the treatments, we have specific concerns, we may be able to discuss that. Those details are also down below. But otherwise, that's everything I have to say right now, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.